Welcome to Whiskey Lore. Drew Hannish here, and my guest today is Owen Martin, who is the head distiller at Stranahans. And, of course, everybody knows how much I like American single malts, and so why not go to Colorado's first distillery and one that focuses on American single malts. So, Owen, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is great because I had a chance to come out, Proximo Spirits had me come out there for the big Snowflake unveiling and sales, and that was amazing to see firsthand and the passion that people have for the product, and then to get to see you up on the stage where I thought maybe someday I'd see you too, or I would see at Red Rocks. So that was a lot of fun. So we'll talk some about that experience, and also you have a very interesting background that took you to Scotland, and so I want to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah.
So, let's. I'm going to ask you the most important question first, because I understand you're originally from Kansas City.
Yes.
Okay, and you live in Denver.
Yep.
Is it the Chiefs or the Broncos?
I've said I kind of have to be a closeted Chiefs fan here, so definitely Chiefs all day. But in a professional capacity, I keep the gear in the closet.
Nice. Yeah, I'm against you on both sides because I grew up a Charger fan. So a long-suffering Charger fan, I can say.
Yeah, well, it's looking like the good days are coming. So for both of us, I hope. That game on Thursday was incredible.
It was. I know. I was like, well, I'll probably be going to bed early on this one, and then I was like, wow, this is something. So it's gonna be fun to watch.
Yep.
Fun to watch. So you got started out in mechanical engineering, yes. I understand?
Yeah. So I did some pipe stress analysis very briefly, and luckily I was kind of able to, I guess, ascertain that was not for me sooner rather than later. So I didn't, put too many years into that career before deciding it was time to pivot and move to the next thing. So I was homebrewing throughout that whole time, and in fact, when I went to Scotland, I had in mind that I would be doing it for the brewing part of the course. It was a split brewing distilling degree. And I kind of joked that just spending enough time in the pubs of Edinburgh, drinking, whatever their daily special was for the dram, it didn't take too long to kind of pivot and then move from beer to whiskey.
Yeah. When I went to Scotland, I went to Ireland for 4 days, and then I went to Scotland for about a week and a half. And at that time, my opinion was Scotland is for whiskey and Ireland is for beer.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in Scotland, the only beer I had was Tennant, and I'm going to make all my Scottish friends mad at me, but I don't know that I don't think I could ever warm to Tennant.
I kind of had to as a poor scrapping college student. I won't lie, I probably drank more Tennants than any other thing my entire time there. Actually, it was pretty cool. As part of the course, we did a lot of trips to, everything across the process. So we actually went to still makers that Diageo uses and all these other awesome places. And as part of the first half of the course on brewing, we got to see the huge Tennant's plant with their enormous lagering tanks and everything. So, cool front to back, and maybe that helped me justify drinking it.
Nice. So we're talking about your degree over there because you went to go learn home brewing, not home brewing, but brewing in general as a career. And you went to is it Heriot Watt? How do they pronounce it over there?
Heriot Watt.
Heriot Watt. Okay. And Heriot Watt is apparently has a master's degree. So I find on brewing and distillation. Are they combined?
Yep. So I think it was through life sciences. I think maybe it got rolled into the engineering department a year or two ago. But it's a brewing and distilling sciences degree, and they have an undergraduate as well, and also just certificates through different modules of the course. So in comparison to what's offered in the U.S., it's kind of on a whole different level. I chose to go there mainly because I'm impatient. So it was all the stuff in the U.S. was waitlisted by a year or so, and they were certificates, nothing actual formal degrees. And so with enough kind of looking around on the internet, it was kind of a no-brainer, honestly. And fortunately, schooling in the UK and Europe's quite a bit cheaper than here. So when I kind of put all the numbers together, it made some financial sense as well, and then was able to get a nice scholarship along the way. So it all kind of worked out.
Well, what's the process for doing that? I mean, do you have to have somebody sponsor you to come over, or
no? They're pretty happy to have Americans there because they know they can get some more money out of us. Kind of on that same token. So I think the part of the degree, so you had to have a science or engineering undergraduate to be accepted into the master's course. But I had plenty of classmates with liberal arts degrees, and I think they were accepted into the program. And after the first semester, if they had passing grades and were in good standing, then they got bumped into the master's degree. So they found a way to make it inclusive for anyone that was, really going to put their time and effort into it.
How much did you know about Scotch whiskey when you went over there?
Not a whole lot. My parents' friends had given me a Balvenie sampler pack as part of my undergraduate graduation present, and that was really my first foray into any single malts. So, I think I've always been like a taste test kind of guy, whether it was at the soda fountain or at craft beer at that point. So it definitely getting a little Balvenie sampler I was pretty into, but didn't appreciate it for what it was flavors wise until a little bit later.
Yeah. Were you a whiskey drinker or at all before that, or were you just hardcore beer?
Yeah, definitely was fully beer nerd, which is funny because then we talk about how much Tennent's I drank in Scotland, so it really reversed course there as whiskey became clearly a central part of my life. But now I drank Cuba Libres in college, and I don't touch a whole lot of rum now because of that.
It's funny, those early experiences, how they can push us away. Does that mean we're not going to see any too many rum finished?
No, we have one right now, actually. So
okay, all right, there you go.
No,
I
mean, kind of go full circle that Balvenie rum cask because I think it's incredible, and so I think rum finishes work incredibly well with single malts. I just don't necessarily drink a lot of straight rum.
Yeah. I remember while we were doing the tour, because we got a chance to walk through and you guided us through, and at one point somebody asked you about cocktails, and you said or actually it was at Red Rocks when you said that, and it was and I loved your answer because you're like, well, I don't really make cocktails. We have specialists for that.
Right.
That you like to drink it neat, and my thing with rum is that I started off with rum only in mixed drinks, and it was those early days of, whether it was Bacardi or whatever it was that I was mixing in there. That was as far as I went with cocktails. I never really thought about whiskey as a cocktail thing until I really started going around to distilleries and hearing people talking about them, but I never made that connection.
Right. Yeah, and I think it's cool. I think Scotch has had a long-standing issue with being cocktail accessible, and I think Compass Box and a few other companies are sort of pioneering that, which is cool to see. I mean, since we use New Oak, obviously a little bit sweeter than your Scotch and Irish single malts, and so I think that lends us to cocktails. But it's been interesting to see, to me as a Scotch nerd, how that gets used in cocktails.
Yeah. So you didn't, when you were there, really the only distilleries that were close to Edinburgh, I think, would be Glenkinchie, wasn't too far away.
Yep.
Now all of a sudden you have Rosebank is there. You've got, it's coming in, and you've got Holyrood.
Yeah, I was going to say Holyrood, and Krabby's. There's a few new ones popping up in the city itself, which is cool to see because even when I was there, the distilleries are not, they're very much like estates in the country. Glasgow is a little bit different. So yeah, it's I think they're seeing the tourism that can be drawn from that. And I haven't been back since I graduated, which is a shame. But I've heard that Johnny Walker thing that went in on Princess Street is amazing. And
Yeah.
I was always a big SMWS guy, so the Scotch Malt Whiskey Society vaults and all that in Leith were pretty incredible.
Yeah, that was the first chance I actually had to go to a Scotch Malt Whiskey Society. I was actually staying on a back street somewhere in Edinburgh the last time I went, and I'm walking down, and I went, "Oh, there! Look, maybe I should go in and see." I wasn't sure whether I was allowed to just walk into the place or I had to have a membership.
Probably weren't.
What's that?
You probably weren't.
Yeah, well, they served me anyway.
Yeah, no, hey, more power to you. I luckily had a couple of friends that were members, so I would just bother them until they took me along with them.
Yeah, that's fun. So, did you get to visit certain distilleries while you were there as part of your program?
Yeah. So we went. We went to a few of them around there. Speaking about single malts, but we went to the grain distilleries as well. So those are typically more in the city or around the city. So you gotta kind of study all aspects. Obviously, single malts are what people want to talk about, and those are the ones that are aesthetically pleasing. But you go to the industrial grain distilleries, and from a process standpoint, they're equally fascinating to me.
Yeah. You saw Porteous Mills?
Yeah, we went to the names escape me right now, but the one that's in Edinburgh.
With the Holyrood or
No, let me let's see.
because I haven't really talked about this much on the podcast, but one of the things you notice when you go around to all these distilleries is that a lot of them have these Porteous Mills, and it's funny because the company went out of business decades and decades and decades ago.
Yeah.
And there's like one guy, Ronnie Lee, that goes around to all the distilleries in Scotland and fixes these things. He comes in and he checks it out, and maybe he replaces a part here or there, but for the most part, his job is just to go around to Scotch whiskey distilleries. And I'm thinking, man, if he passed on, who fixes these things? He was the only one that had the ability to service those things.
Yeah, he's got the market cornered. Well, hopefully he's got an apprentice going. North British, that's the one I was trying to think of.
Okay.
Big grain distillery in Edinburgh. It was. I mean, it's cool. Originally, I'd kind of thought about maybe using my engineering undergraduate degree a little bit more to kind of go into maybe the engineering department of a larger brewery or distillery. At least that's kind of what I thought about going into it. I still use aspects of the engineering degree, but I went full production, which has been pretty rewarding.
So at what point did you decide it was going to be whiskey instead of beer, and what was the thing that sold you on it?
Yeah, I mean, outside of drinking whiskey and enjoying whiskey, I through the course, there's a couple of things I did really well on the first semester. Again, probably due to the engineering degree. That I think there was maybe one other person with an engineering degree in the course. So I ended up getting. I was the student with the highest marks, so I had the best overall grade after the first semester. And they do a lot of like recognizing that sort of thing with different honors or awards. So I actually got to go to London, and there's this thing called the Worshipful Company of Distillers. So it's the livery companies of London, so ancient trade groups. So everyone's got anything you can think of, there's a trade group for. And they do mostly like a lot of fundraising nowadays, but it's definitely a who's who of industry. And so I didn't get a choice of going to the brewers one or the distillers one. They just said, hey, top student after the first semester gets to go to London for the distillers dinner and all this. So kind of got admitted to that as a freeman, and I need to go back to London so I can get my freeman of the City of London thing, which basically means it's an honor, but I think it means you can be like hung with a silk scarf if you get sentenced to death.
Oh,
And,
that's good to know.
you can drive your sheep over the City of London Bridge as a freeman. I gather, but yeah. So that kind of got me meeting a lot of big gin producers, and like the head distillers or the general managers of all these really famous distilleries. That's when it really kind of kicked into gear. Where it was the end of the first semester. The second semester was going into distilling more so. Obviously, the first step of making whiskey, especially in Scotland, is very, very similar to beer. So that's why you kind of build the basics of the course with that. But yeah, at that dinner in London, between the two semesters, that's one of the moments where I specifically remember being like, I think maybe I should take it in a different direction.
Did you have any consideration in the back of your mind of staying in Scotland?
I definitely did. I made it through a lot of interviews trying to stay there as my visa was very quickly coming up. But on the same point as drinking a lot of Tennent's, I didn't have a whole lot of money at that point either. So there's a few factors. There's definitely a girlfriend who had stuck with me through my time in Scotland doing distance, my now wife. So I think staying in Scotland longer might have she might not have been as big a fan of that idea as I was. So I think through a variety of reasons, it was time to head back stateside.
So when you came back, you jumped into a distillery where, rather than making American single malt, you were making bourbon and rye. How much of a culture shock was that for you?
Very, very much so. Yeah. So I pretty much moved directly from Edinburgh to Arkansas, and so reverse culture shock was strong. But yeah, my wife moved down there with me, and we actually fell in love with Little Rock, where we lived for a couple of years. But yeah, it was a small distillery, so it was just me and one or two guys at any time under me. We made like I think 5 or 6 barrels a week. So definitely, and my master's degree, my thesis had been through one of the large distilleries, Scotch distilleries. So I'd kind of been working amongst that and seeing what a large-scale single malt production looked like. So then coming back to the U.S. and not only not making single malt, but working for, kind of a mom and pop at that point, was quite a bit different. But I think super valuable ultimately because it was me hands-on every single day. It wasn't delegating duties or anything. I'd obviously learned about every step of the way, but I think learning by doing is incredibly important in this industry. So that knowledge base functionally I honestly view those couple years there as kind of like an extension of the course, where that was really nailing down more of the mechanical and hands-on aspects of this industry.
Did they, when you were in Edinburgh, did you learn a bit about the American process, the bourbon process for making whiskey?
Not a ton. I mean, yeah, so it's kind of funny. The same with Irish whiskey. They sort of gloss over those parts of it, which is fine. I mean, again, to go back to Scotch grain whiskey production is fairly similar. You're using column stills. You're using corn or wheat or something of that nature that's cheaper and has a little higher yield, and you're distilling it to a higher proof. So even if it's not exactly bourbon production, I think the science behind it holds true. You're working with corn's a whole different game than barley, taking it up to gelatinization temperatures and all that jazz. So the equipment wasn't all that different between grain whiskey production and then American bourbon production.
Yeah. Did you start out immediately as the head distiller there, or did you have somebody to kind of learn from?
Yeah, so the founder's the head distiller. I was the lead distiller, and then with a couple assistants under me. So I was the one running the equipment every day. But I was never the head distiller there.
Yeah, that'd be quite the thing to jump straight from school and learning Scotch whiskey into doing bourbon and rye. Yeah. So no. There was definitely a little adjustment period, both culturally and production-wise, but
no, I think it was a great experience overall, and as we said before I jumped on here, I think the combination of doing my thesis through a large Scotch distillery, then working at a small American distillery, kind of those two things in conjunction really made Stranahan's the no-brainer spot to end up when that job posting did come up.
Yeah. So how did you find out about that?
There's a website called Pro Brewer where most craft breweries and increasingly distilleries are posting jobs. So that's just within the industry a known place to go when you're on the job hunt.
Okay. And so when you joined, there was already a head distiller. So
Yeah.
what was your position when you first came in?
I was just kind of a mid-tier distiller. There's a number system kind of indicating how much tenure you have and how much industry experience you have. So I was kind of middle tier there. But no, I did have a Heriot Watt connection actually. So typically Stranahan's does not hire out of state, given the how active the brewing scene is here, and we've never really had trouble finding fantastic local candidates for any open job. But luckily, a guy I'd spent all of a week with, because he was in the year before me at Heriot Watt, and we just sort of, our paths crossed right as he was moving back to the U.S. and I was moving to Scotland, and we kind of struck up a friendship. And he's from Colorado, so he actually came back, and his first job after graduation was being the production manager at Stranahan's, and
Okay.
so he vouched for me when the job posting came up, and they luckily his word counted for something, and they decided to hire out of state for one of the first times, and so then he's moved on. He's actually doing his PhD at Oregon State in barley science, which is pretty awesome. One of our professors from Heriot Watt has moved over to Oregon State as well. So that's kind of talking about how that didn't exist a few years ago when I was looking at courses, and they were all brewing certificates, that now we kind of have some academic programs, mainly for brewing, but more so distilling starting to grow, and Oregon State's one of those spots, which is awesome. But sorry, a little tangent,
Yeah.
but yeah, anyway, he put in for me, and so then about after 2 years in Arkansas, then I was able to jump over here and start to kind of put down some roots. And as you asked, I was sort of middle tier distiller, and then sort of worked my way up from there, where I was doing more of the small scale R&D projects. They knew I kind of had the background in Scotch and bourbon and rye production, so I was able to take different variables that I'd kind of learned from those industries and tweak things here for little small scale things, and then that sort of laid the groundwork to step into larger roles as those opened up.
Was there anything that you saw in the shift from Scotland back to the United States that struck you odd, that you're jumping into a distillery that's a single malt distillery, and that you're like, wow, this is less regulated, or they really aren't focusing on this, or that kind of thing?
Yeah, less regulated, for sure, which I didn't view as a bad thing necessarily. But it was interesting to see, and I think it is changing. I think as whiskey's blowing up, it's getting definitely more innovative on all fronts. But it was kind of interesting to come immediately back to the U.S. and see maybe a slightly more innovative mindset or willingness to shoot for the moon and see what you can hit, which I think does come back to Scotch regulations being stricter as well. Like I'll go back to Compass Box was operating when I was there, and I think I had just gotten a pretty firm slap on the wrist for putting French oak staves in their barrels, and the SWA didn't like that. So didn't have to deal with any of that sort of thing back in the U.S. It was pretty cool. We started using specialty malts in the bourbon production we were doing for small batches in Arkansas, and then coming to Stranahan's, most of our R&D has been done through different cast finishes, which is kind of neat. It sprung up completely independently of Scotch, which has used more cast finishes, obviously Balvenie, and all that, and I think it's blown up from there. But yeah, even the earliest days of Stranahans, they were looking at wine barrel finishes and whatnot, and I think it's been kind of fun to see that grow in parallel with the Scotch industry doing it. And then luckily with kind of sort of my background and knowledge, we've done more R&D on the front side with different yeasts and grain, different roasts of barley and whatnot. So yeah, I was able to kind of expand what we were doing here, which has been cool.
Yeah. So Rob Dietrich was the head distiller.
Yep.
When you were there. Now he's run off to San Francisco and joined Metallica.
Yeah.
If you could join a rock band, they're making the blackened whiskey. So if you could join a rock band in making a personality whiskey, what rock band would you join?
Oh man, that's a tough call. Yeah, we were joking about that, trying to figure out who our band would be here, and I don't know what encapsulates Stranahans. It'd probably be, I mean, Nathaniel Rateliff's, probably the biggest local artist, has hit the national scene, and he just did a whiskey with one of the downtown distilleries, so maybe we missed our mark on that one. But I could see like Avett Brothers or one of those type Americana folksy bands sort of fitting in. But I don't know. We're not quite like tequila. I feel like every celebrity has a tequila now. You're seeing more whiskeys, but I don't know if that's in the cards for us to do any sort of collaboration like that.
So what was it like to step up into the lead role at that point? Did you feel like, wow, here's a chance? I got some ideas in my head.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you see every person has a different approach to blending, and Rob is a fantastic blender, and I think you're seeing some of his special releases start to come out through Blackened. I think they just had their Willet collaboration, and yeah, so it was sort of kind of trying to keep the same character and ethos of our special releases while putting my own spins on it, which has been a lot of fun to kind of develop what I kind of think is my signature styles going along with it, while still trying to keep all our diehard fans happy by not, entirely rewriting what Snowflake and Cast Thief and all these mean. So it's been great actually, but yeah, I think it wasn't a crazy step up because I was already doing a lot of the R&D stuff behind the scenes, that essentially they just brought me to the forefront to then talk about it more. And, I just think one reason was able to step up to where I am is because I like to talk about stuff. And I think a lot of distillers are just grumpy bearded men that would rather be in the background, and I get that. But, I think the combination of having the passion for doing R&D, for blending, obviously, and then being able to trot out and talk about it was a good combination of what they're looking for someone to be a head distiller.
It's funny because from the outside and not really knowing much early on and before I started talking to distillers, my thought of the distiller, the head distiller or master distiller, is that they're basically overseeing the day-to-day operations and handling things like that. Talking to Jeff Arnett and him starting up his own company now, he said, when he was working for Jack Daniels, that he didn't really see himself as the spokesperson type. He wanted to sort of be the day-to-day guy, but Jimmy Bedford, the guy he took over for, was like, he was out of the distillery much more than he was in the distillery. You struck me as somewhat of a natural up there on stage at Red Rocks doing your thing. Did you kind of have to push yourself a little bit more to get used to that role?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, for years being behind the scenes and being pretty comfortable with that, and being I describe it as the hermit in the background, just filling and emptying barrels, and that's honestly still my happy place to be. But through more of that, I'm not a natural, I would say, but it's come just through repetition and gradually speaking to more and more people at a clip. So my still preferred thing to do is just kind of like what we did before the day before the release, where I just walk around with a small group of people and kind of have a more intimate chat about whiskey is always my preferred way to do something like that. But it's not always in the cards when it comes to a big whiskey release. So
Yeah.
I think I've kind of got my head wrapped around it, and it's interesting that you say that, like talking about Jeff Arnett and people kind of finding their footing in that balance between the sort of marketing role and the production role. It is always split, and I'd say every distillery kind of defines that in their own ways. There's head distillers and master distillers who are just plant managers, and that's great. They're probably really, really good at it. And then there's, the emeritus almost thing where you're a fully marketing person and you hit the road talking about it, and then there's a million shades in between the two. So I've found myself pulled more into that marketing world in the last year or so. But I think my heart's still in production and at the distillery, and I don't want to ever fully separate away from that.
Yeah. It's one of the hardest things for me in getting into doing podcasting and going out and meeting people and doing all that sort of thing is that I'm a one-to-one person.
Yeah.
When I go to a party, I do not work the crowd at all. I would be a horrible host. I'm the guy who I find somebody to talk to, and then we just dig in deep and talk about all sorts of different things.
Well, it lends itself to the bulk of your podcasting, then, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, there's that hard thing about getting out there and shaking hands with people. And I think my biggest thing is remembering names.
Yeah,
I am horrible at remembering names. And as I get older, I'm getting even worse at remembering faces. So it's kind of like I walk away and go, wait a second. Now, if I ever meet them again, that's the tough part.
Well, and I'm a face guy as well, and masks haven't made that any easier. All the reporters came out on that Friday before Snowflake, and I've kind of got faces over a lot of people on Zoom, but then I still kind of have that moment of standing right in front of them, like, have I met you? Do I know you? Should I know your name? And it's just one of the quirks of the job, I guess.
So let's talk a little bit about Stranahans for people who are not overly familiar with it. Now, the first time I had Stranahans, I was out in western Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I want to taste something local. What should I get? And so someone suggested that I have Stranahans, and I sipped it. I enjoyed it. I went back home. I do this thing called bracketology, where in the spring we do rank all these different whiskeys or put them in brackets, and everybody votes to the top. And I had put Stranahans in the American craft category, but I had an American single malt category, and somebody said to me, why didn't you put Stranahans in the American single malt? And I said, I didn't know it was an American single malt. Because when you look at the label, it didn't really stand out. It does now.
The old label, I think, said Rocky Mountain Malt Whiskey. We've had a few iterations and goes at it. But I think that, it really at roots goes back to that we didn't set out to be a single malt. We didn't really know what a single malt was. It was just what's the local alcohol, what's the local ingredient. And with Denver being Denver and Colorado being Colorado, craft beer, has been as big here as anywhere for the last 10, 20 years. So kind of piggybacking on that craft beer movement was sort of a no-brainer in establishing what a Rocky Mountain or what a Colorado whiskey would taste like.
So you are actually in what used to be the Flying Dog Brewery?
No. So we used to be downtown, and we were set up next to Flying Dog Brewery, and literally they were piping a Flying Dog Porter beer through the wall, or what was based on their porter. It wasn't hopped. But they were piping that through the wall and distilling it. And, again, that didn't, single malt still isn't officially a thing. I've heard pretty damn soon here will be officially classified. But, at that point, malt whiskey was what the classification was, right? Just the same way the bourbon or rye whiskey are classified. It just means 51% or more of the base ingredient, malted barley, in a new charred barrel, and that was essentially the stipulations there. So sourcing a beer, obviously not hard to get 51% or more malted barley. In fact, 100% malted barley. And we did use new casks by nature of that being the regulations. So, there obviously some workarounds to use used cooperage if you want to. You just have to change some verbiage on the label at this point. And we have a handful of trials down with used Stranahans barrels and used other types of barrels. But I think what has formed is our flavor profile is based on new char. That's not to say that we can't use some used barrels and do that as a special release, or maybe down the line even have some sort of blend between new and used. But because malt whiskey was defined the way it was back when we started, you kind of had to. So those butterscotches and caramels of the new charred barrel has kind of melded with the specialty malts that were used in that porter recipe I was talking about. So chocolate, caramel malt, and a little bit of black malt. And so those kind of roasty and caramelized flavors from the specialty malt, I think, have really sort of, in that flavor profile, melded with some of the oak extractives from the new barrel, and that's Stranahans.
Well, and when I go to Scotland and I hear them talk about their barley, they'll use concerto barley. They have particular types of barley, but I don't ever hear them talking about using multiple types of barley in the same recipe, like a chocolate barley or that kind of thing. Is that done over there, or is that just an American thing?
That is not done a whole lot, but you're kind of seeing more of that. We touched on that earlier. You are seeing more push and innovation there in an industry where there wasn't a ton of innovation on that type the other, even when I was there. So what is it? Glenmorangie, I think, has a
Signet. As soon as I asked you that question, I went, "Oh, wait a second!
Yeah.
They make Signet."
Glenmorangie does. I
Chocolate.
believe there are some other ones since then, which I have not kept up on. But that one's been around for a little bit actually now, and that was kind of paved the way at that point. I'm trying to look. I have our barley varietal here, but we use a brewer's malt, so it's a little bit different. We're not using ones that are specifically designed for single malt Scotch, but we think that gives us a nice kind of clean base flavor. And then those specialty malts have always been with us since the beginning, which I think is a hallmark of not only us, but I think American single malts have kind of, as they're gaining traction and gaining a name for themselves, you'll see a lot of them that use specialty malt in the U.S. I think because of the stature of craft beer when those distilleries launched. And then we use brewers' yeast as well. So that's another thing I think you see localized to American single malts, as opposed to Irish or Scotch, where they're using distillers' yeast, fermenting in 2 days or so. And I think you don't. Not to say there isn't distillers' yeast used in American single malts, but I'd say it's almost a more even split. I mean, look at Westland or Westward or the other big players in the American single malt game, and we're all using different strains of brewer's yeast, which again, I think even, if we're saying we have similar flavor profiles to the use of new char, that each of those things adds our own little spin and nuance to our flavor profiles.
So it was interesting when you were showing and doing the tour, because a lot of the front end of the production is still really a beer production more than it is if you went to a bourbon distillery. You have a cooker that you're using afterwards to kind of work out the bacteria and the rest, and before that you're getting wort, which is you're basically taking it off of the grain.
Yes. Yeah.
Rather than doing on grain, and so it's fun to see that. It got me thinking, though, when I go to a distillery in Scotland, and you were showing the pumping in of the of the malted grain. I'm thinking over there they always take you through this shaker box that they have.
Yep.
It's a wooden shuttle box.
The sieve.
And Yeah, and it has the 3 layers on it where they're separating the grist from the flour from the husk, and then they have like a certain percentage of each that they use in a formula.
Yep.
Do you go to that length on this?
We have one of those here, yeah. So we know. I mean, we don't make a show of it, but it's more so for production. Like if you have too much of the fines, right, then on a brew kit, you're just going to clog up your false bottom, and you won't ever be able to pull off that wort. So yeah, we know functionally what we're looking for on that as in terms of that split, and your mill should be adjustable to the point where you can kind of fine tune that tighter or looser to then grind it into the ratios that you're looking for.
Yeah, so the fines are the flour?
Yeah, exactly. So if you have your mill set too tightly, then you're pretty much pulverizing the entire barley kernel into flour. And if you just in your mash tun, right? If you just put flour and hot water, then you just have pretty much made some Play-Doh at the bottom of your mash tun. So mash tuns have what's called a false bottom, right? It's just like a mesh bottom, and there is that kind of, you need that blend of different grind sizes because you want to seed your bed essentially in a way that liquid can move through that. You don't want it to move too quickly because then you're not getting your starch conversion to sugar, and you're not pulling that the wort liquid off of it. So there is this kind of perfect ratio that you look for when you're making beer and wort.
Yeah. And you don't do a sour mash process. There's no back set.
No, there's no back set. Honestly, our equipment's not really made for that. I have played around with the idea of just pumping some of our spent wash back into our boil kettle, as a way to regulate that pH. And someday if we have a slow week, I might do that. But right now it's kind of full speed ahead. So that extra production lag time it'd take to do all that just isn't in the cards right now. But we did some sour mash when I was in bourbon production, so I'm acquainted with the process. But yeah, typically, that's an on grain thing that you do, right? So more of the bourbon and rye production as opposed to us, who uses more of a European influenced production or front end production style. Yeah.
And it was interesting to see that you guys use some very early Vendome pot stills there. They look so different from what you are used to seeing these days from Vendome. These were some of the first ones that they made. Is that correct?
Yeah, they were definitely, you could see kind of where they were developing, some of their thoughts and styles on that to nowadays. Nothing against people that have Vendomes now, but if you look at those Vendomes, they all are, I don't want to say cookie cutter, but they all kind of follow the same formula, right? The shape of the actual still is similar. The columns are 4-plate. The condensers are the same setup, and there's elements of that in each of our stills, but you can definitely see it's kind of an earlier design iteration, which it can be good, can be bad. I mean, good in that I think obviously your still shape dictates a good amount of your spirit character, right? In terms of what the reflux is by the geometry of your still and the condenser. And so we could say that ours is completely unique by nature of having these kind of one-off experimental stills that Vendome was doing. But on the flip side, they definitely are some things that involved with them that I'm like, why was this made this way? And I'm more so when it comes to like when we're CIPing or cleaning the stills, there's some dead legs and things that don't make a ton of sense, but ultimately they're still our babies, and that I think the good vastly outweighs the bad, that they're completely unique to us.
And you probably heard it while you were in Scotland quite a bit about making sure that you have the shape of your still the same when you replace it. So are you stuck with what you got? If they had to be replaced, could you make some adjustments?
Oh
to
yeah,
them?
no, for sure. Safe? Vendome still has the original files, all their drawing files, their engineering files are all right there. We actually were looking at them a lot this past year because we did a condenser replacement project on all the wash stills. So, nope. I mean, other than a really long wait time, which is what you deal with any anything nowadays, but especially with Vendome and their popularity for good reason. We could have them smash out the exact same style still. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool. We have an internal coil as well instead of a jacket on the wash stills, which is kind of unique. But basically, what that means is functionally we could never even do on grain with those stills unless we also installed an agitator, because you would just burn the mash right onto the coils rather than actually distill off of it. So really, the wash stills are only able to use wash and liquid, and on grain's not even a possibility.
Okay. So what special issues do you have to deal with in Denver when it comes to making whiskey? And I bring this up. I love to tell a story about my dad. My dad, the first time he went to Denver, he said, Mile High City, and he loved watching the Denver Broncos play on TV, and he had this vision that Mile High Stadium was like almost like at the top of a volcano. It was at the top of this mountain, and he was so shocked to see that it's kind of flat everywhere around. The mountains are off in the distance,
right,
but you're still at that mile high elevation, and so. As I learned walking around the place, even at Red Rocks, I was like losing my breath, and I'm like, wow, now I truly feel out of shape. But what does a whiskey go through in terms of production? What did you kind of learn as you got there?
Yeah, so Mile High, I think, is about a half mile from the distillery, which is kind of cool. The stadium, I mean. So we're pretty much right there, right with them. Everyone always asks how that affects distillation. I mean, obviously, you can talk boiling points. Water boils at a slightly lower temperature here than it does at sea level. But functionally, we find that alcohol comes off the stills just almost exactly the same, right? So a little bit higher on the wash stills because of them being, the charge is 7.5% ABV. So I think we find usually 180. Low 180s, 180 is when we see distillation or distillate come off of the wash stills. But I mean, the spirit stills are right at the boiling point of alcohol. We're charging 40% ABV low wines into the spirit stills, so a little bit higher than what you see in Scotland. But yeah, it comes off right at 173 or so. So as soon as you hit that boiling point of alcohol, we're seeing the spirit stills crank on to production. What it affects for us is the aging and the back end of that. So because we're at Mile High, because the atmosphere is thinner up here, we obviously have very low humidity. And what that manifests itself as is big temperature fluctuations, seasonally, obviously, and then every single day as well, because we don't have humidity in the air to hold temperature. So we actually have 2 climate controlled warehouses and 2 ones that we don't climate control, kind of for that reason, to sort of get the best of both worlds. Because the non-climate controlled ones are just getting, that distillate's going into the oak and back constantly, daily. And so we can get a ton of oak extraction off that, a really high increase in proof, right? So like when you're talking about angel share, obviously hot temperatures, big temperature fluctuations are the main thing that determines your overall loss. So we lose about 9% a year, at least for the first few years. And I think Scotland's 2%, 3% maybe at most. So seeing that temperature mainly dictates that. But then the second main factor in your angel share is the humidity. So I usually just tell people, think about a barrel really simplified as just a mix of water and alcohol. If it's a really dry surrounding climate but around that barrel, think of the barrel like a membrane, then more water is getting pulled out of that barrel to try to equalize what's in the barrel with what's around it. So you're losing both water and alcohol, but of that 9%, we're losing more water than alcohol. So there's a few reasons why we fill it lower proof, and that's one of them. That we fill down at 110 proof as opposed to the legal max in the U.S., which is 125, and that's because by the time we dump, some of the 10-year-old barrels that I've dumped, I've seen up 150, 160 even.
Wow.
So yeah, we get a pretty steep increase in proof in the non-climate controlled warehouses, which is good. It's a good thing. But we have the climate controlled ones so that when I'm blending, I can have like a more steadier maturation profile, something that is lighter on the oak, something that more that malt flavor is still definitely in the driver's seat, but then I can blend with some of the non-climate controlled ones that definitely have a heavier oak profile, more of the oak derived flavors as well, and definitely pack a punch proof wise. So when I'm blending, I'm not only blending ages, for our yellow label, 4, 5, 6, and 7-year-old, but I'm blending rack houses as well. So I could have 4-year-old that's climate controlled, 4-year-old that's non-climate controlled, and same with each of the older liquids as well. So that it gives me like a whole other axis of variable to play with, I think, to kind of hit my desired flavor profile for consistency, which is really fun from a blender's profile.
So was blending something that was a decent amount of the education that you got in Scotland, or none at all?
No, I mean, not none, but definitely lower. We were essentially the course I did in retrospect kind of prepares you just to be like the production manager of a large Scotch distillery. So much less emphasis put on the blending and much more emphasis put on the science behind the front end of the process, the science behind the maturation part of the process. There's certainly a blending portion of the course, but I think, I think it's like I said earlier, sort of a learn by doing experience. So it's definitely something I've come into later into my career. And that's not to say I don't use science or what I've learned in the course when it comes to that, but I think you kind of gotta find your own way. That's definitely where the more of the artistic side of the industry comes in, the kind of culinary inspired part of the process. And I think every time I do a blend, I feel like I'm learning something else that I take with me and take forward to then use on the next iteration.
Do you tend to try other whiskeys to develop your palate, or are you kind of working on your own whiskeys and kind of working through them and going, wow, okay, here's something that works?
Yeah, I mean, obviously most of what I do is with our stuff. I mean, all my professional blending is with Stranahans, but that's not to say I don't have an infinity bottle at home or mess around with friends with our own little Scotch blends when we're just killing time on a Saturday. So yeah, there's definitely some of that. I mean, I think I am clearly more of a Scotch guy and Scotch educated, so I feel like I've probably passed a little bit more of that influence into our production and our back end production as well than American whiskey. But I think the cool thing about us is that you can kind of take influence from American whiskey, you can take influence from Scotch and world whiskeys, and then also we can take influence from craft beer, obviously, and pull variables from each of those with both the nuts and bolts of production and the blending side of things on the back end.
Yeah, and then you also can add the whole, as we'll talk about with Snowflake, the wine industry as well,
right? Yeah,
and brandy and all of that. So, yeah, I think the challenge for me in getting my palate working and getting to detect all these different flavors was just opening my mind to the fact that it's more than just vanilla, caramel, oak.
sure.
That there are so many other flavors that you are there to be discovered. And when you came back, there were a lot more American single malt distilleries than before you went, and now they've exploded beyond that.
Oh, yeah.
So, and we think about Scotland, and Scotland is a radius of 200, 300, miles to travel from one end to the other. The U.S., when we talk about terroir, we have so many different styles that we
Yeah.
could probably come up with, and so many different expressions using local grains and also just the humidity and
Oh, yeah.
temperature swings and all the rest.
Right. I mean, whether if we did no cast finishing, no anything outside of that realm, and just distilled our whiskey here and just shipped, a barrel to the East Coast, a barrel to the West Coast, a barrel to Canada, a barrel to Texas, and you could have literally that one variable tweaked, and with how crazy, how big North America is in the range of climates and elevations and humidity levels, that those whiskeys would all turn out entirely different. So, yeah, I've said that to some other folks that, I mean, you look at the range of Scotch character that comes out of such a small area. Like, obviously they have very distinctive regions there, and kind of commonalities between whiskeys coming out of those regions. And hopefully, I think that's something that the U.S. may work towards. I mean, I think a good thing is, because of how innovative the American craft distilling industry has been, and because we're kind of reaching that a lot of those distilleries growing up, is that we're going to see, I hope, some commonality region-wise, but also, everybody's just kind of doing their own thing. So I don't know if we'll quite develop the same regionality that Scotland has, but I think we're going to develop into something interesting one way or another. So, yeah, I mean, climate aside, then, yeah, local places love to use local breweries, local wineries for cast finishing. Whatever your local brush or trees or anything. I've seen people smoke their grain with like mesquite in the Southwest. There's a distillery in Colorado that does aspen stave finishing. So you're seeing, local, whatever the local, what I guess locality used in a variety of means in the U.S., which is, I think, amazing. And then, that's not even bringing terroir into it, with where barley's coming. Well, sorry, terroir on the front side. I mean, with where your barley's coming from, whether you're using specialty malts or not. There's one of the other main single malt places in Colorado actually sources Scottish barley to make theirs, and does 100% pale in more the Scottish way. And I think it's cool that American single malt regulations have allowed that to work, because clearly they want to go with their kind of Scotch roots on things, and I think they absolutely should. And we're kind of going with more of the craft beer roots, and both of those are equally great in the eyes of American Single Malt Commission, and as they should be.
Yeah. I think what's great about what I'm hearing about the American single malt regulations is that it's leaving it open to experimentation, but it is also still constraining it to a certain point where it's not like Canadian whiskey that we just don't know.
Yeah, and I think they're kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't. And I think really they just knocked it out of the park. So, yeah, like one of the pushbacks I heard is that people wanted a single malt to be open to using malted rye and malted barley and malted wheat, and do a blend of all those and still call it a single malt. And at some point you got to draw the line. I think if you look at everything else, you can use new cooperage, used cooperage. You can have a column still versus solely a pot still, which would never fly in Scotland, right? You can. The size of the barrel is pretty loose. I think it's 600 or 700 liters, so that's a pretty big barrel. What else? Yeah, I mean, they've just done a fantastic job of keeping that really open, so that a lot of the existing single malts are okay, and then also as that industry continues to grow and as innovations continue to hit it, that it allows for all of that. And so, I mean, obviously, especially with how creative and independent American distillers are, you're never going to make everyone happy, especially as you're trying to officially codify something. But at some point, you just got to draw the line and say, hey, this is what it is. I know High West released their first single malt, which was a blend of two different distilleries of theirs, two different DSPs, which is one thing that got nixed in the official regulations, but I think they'll be fine. I mean, they're distilling so much single malt at their new distillery that, in a few more years, they won't need to use the older stock from their original distillery, and that won't be a point anymore. But yeah, like I said, there's always going to be one or two issues that some distillery takes because you can't make everyone happy. But given all the work they put in, given all the input they've asked for, I think it is the best it possibly could be.
The thing that I like is no age requirement, because in that particular case, I don't know how many distillers I've gone to who are using, all variety of sizes of barrels. And then we're also talking about, in a place like Texas, it can be very hard for you to go 3 years in a barrel and not have it come out tasting like a big pile of wood.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, I get that. And I think, I'm not a believer that age is the be-all, end-all sign of a quality, but I think you are seeing more of that. I think especially as the original single malt producers grow up, and we're putting a 10-year-old out and whatnot, that you're not going to see people putting out 6-month-old single malts, at least not in any large capacity. I think if they do, they'll be saying, kind of like what you're seeing newer Scotch distilleries put out. They're like, hey, work in progress. Or I think they call it like malt distillate when they're putting stuff that's under 3 years old out, right? But they know that the consumer is curious about how it tastes and want to phrase it more in try this from a nerding out, like, here's where our flavors are developing standpoint. And I think you're going to see more of that in the U.S. as well. It's kind of that first wave of craft producers are all 10 plus years old now, right? If not older. So I think as the industry grows up, there is going to be a higher bar to maintain sales and maintain profitability. And if a Texas place has to use used cooperage instead of new cooperage to make it a few years further, obviously they know what their climate brings into play, and they're the experts there. So I don't want to step on anyone's toes, but I think leaving that open is a good thing, and ultimately I'm hoping it isn't necessarily a hugely relevant thing as this industry grows up. I think the quality will continue to grow, and if producers aren't putting out quality single malts, then they're not going to survive.
Yeah. So when I tasted your 10-year, and my first question when I tasted it was, does anybody else have an American single malt that is this old that has been put into new charred oak barrels? Because to me, that's the thing that we haven't really seen in Scotland.
Yep. That
we can see here and we can now discover.
Right. So yeah, that was the thing, is when we were developing that, the TTB had a variety of regulations that they hadn't kind of corrected in my mind yet. So your age statement was only the time in the first barrel at the time we were starting to get that into play. So again, talking about constrictive regulations and ones that didn't make a whole lot of sense, we were sort of caught by that. And luckily, because we have the tools that we have, like I said, with climate control warehouses, I was able to take some 8-year-old at that point and kind of all put it in the coolest part of the distillery where we do humidify it and sort of slow the last 2 years of that whiskey's maturation, if that makes sense. Or hold it steady and allow for more of the oxidative reactions to take place without throwing any more oak at it. And I think this batch 2 especially, we did a really good job of making sure that everything was in balance and the oak's not just overwhelming. But so specifically that regulation where the age is only the time in the first barrel, that got finally sort of corrected, I guess. I think it was 2 Augusts ago, or maybe a little bit before that, to where it's total time in oak, and that's more in line with how the rest of the world does it, right? For example, we have a sherry cask whiskey in our lineup, and that's 7 years total time, but only 4 of that's in the new charred barrel. And so, until mid last year, that was a 4-year-old whiskey, which I don't think, even just saying that to anybody, that doesn't make sense. And so luckily that was something that the TTB corrected, realizing that it didn't make any sense. But regardless, I think that 10-year-old I'm really happy with, and I think we can work with new oak on that time frame. But now that we're looking at what maybe a 14-year-old or an 18-year-old or a 21 tastes like, I think cask finishing in my mind is definitely going to come into play. And that cask finishing just means whatever secondary barrel you put it in that held something else, but I don't really view it as finishing for a lot of the things I've come out with. So we just we released our Bushmills cask distillery exclusive this year, and the batch I just put together was 4 years in the new chard and then 4 years in ex Bushmill single malt barrels. So finishing almost kind of, you know, feels like a misnomer, right? Because it's been equal times in the new barrel and the used barrel, and so I'd like to take that same idea for high age stated releases. And so like I'm looking at like a 14-year-old where I want it to be 7 years in the new char and 7 years in the finishing cask. And you know, it's still kind of playing around with what these releases might be, but I think, and we'll see how things develop, because our oldest barrel's I think it's turning 13 years old here in a few months. So I'm just finding out new things as I go along. I'm taking what I think it's going to be, and I at this point I would say I think our 10-year-old is going to be the oldest one that only exists in the new char barrel. But you know, if I find some patch of barrels that spent their entire time in the cool warehouse and it's 14 years old and it tastes great, I'm not gonna, you know, not do anything with that. So
yeah.
So TBD. You know, like I said, just learning things as we hit each milestone. But now that we kind of have a whole other tool set to play with, the TTB finally kind of got their shit together and got you know, more on the world's level of that regulation.
Yeah. Well, when I tasted it, the thing that stood out to me, it still had all the fruity characters to it. There's that banana note that you get in there, and then it also the char kind of led itself to this. What made me think this would pair really nicely with a cigar. It just had a really nice smoky, not in a peaty kind of smoky way, right, but in just the elements of that char that kind of are left over.
Yeah, I'd argue that it's even that long-term char that almost couples a little bit with the black malt that we use in our, you know, base distillate from day one, that you get that kind of roasty character, you know, almost like that Guinness dry kind of roast flavor to it. And I think as that ages, that kind of expresses itself as almost more of a wisp of smoke and sootiness, not in a peated way, like you said, but in its own kind of unique form, which I think was amazing.
Is there, when you're aging these and you're trying to find that right age, is there a moment where you're saying, I have to stop this now because there is too much of the original distillate character that's just disappearing out of this?
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting. There have been some sets of barrels that I thought stayed in the hotter, drier warehouses for maybe a little longer than they should have. But what I did for this year's 10-year-old release was when it hit, like I said, I think around 8 years old. That was or I guess a little bit older than that, but they'd changed the regulations. So at that point, I didn't know if aging. Before that, I didn't know if that counted as aging stopped the minute I started fiddling around with it. But I took kind of a handful of 2011 barrels, dumped them. You know, they were all up high proof, like I said, probably high 130s, low 140s, maybe even in proof. And I blended all those together in our cut tank, just like I do, anything we're getting ready for bottling. I started cutting it down, so I cut it from 130 something back down to 110 or so, and then I put it right back in the barrels it came from. So because the regulations had changed, and because in my reading of that allowed me to essentially sort of reset the proof, bring the proof back down. That way I'm not pulling out progressively more tannins from the barrel, keeping that in check. And then essentially, if I'm sure you've talked about slow proofing with people. That was like my version of the slowest proofing ever, because I proofed it part of the way and then put it back in the barrel for almost 2 years. And so I think this year's batch kind of speaks to that working, because I'm a huge fan of that, and I think it worked well. So I've kind of taken what I've learned from that and done that with a few other batches of barrels, some 2012s and into 2013, kind of by season on that one, in case, if we ever wanted to release it as a bottle and bond for whatever reason. But trying to think far ahead and keep my options as open as possible. And I think that, I'll wrap it up real quick. That, and then putting them, then put them into some of the cooler warehouses where I know it'll essentially have a nice steady maturation for the last few years of its life.
Yeah. How far do you think you could push it? And do you think there's a market? I mean, because the Pappies sell, and they
Yeah.
as old as those things get, there's obviously a market for people who want to just drink something because it's got an old age on it. Is it?
I don't know if they're drinking it even. I think it's on their shelf.
Yeah,
I think
that's a good question.
I think they're looking at what they can sell it for. I don't know. At least some of them are. Whiskey is an investment I'm not a huge fan of, but I think you're right. I think there is a upper limit, and again, I think for us that's going to be dictated by which warehouse it stays in. I mean, we've touched on it, right? We use barley, which is inherently lower yields, higher cost than corn, right? If we were just looking to make something that for barrel flavors to express themselves on, then we would just make bourbon. For me, if I spent all this time using barley, using specialty malt, which is has less yields, right? Because we've essentially roasted the starch, and it's not going to be converted into fermentable sugars at that point. So not only are we using barley, we're using some barley that's even lower yield, and then we're using brewer's yeast, which takes 5 to 7 days to ferment, when we could have turned a fermenter over in 2 days had we used distiller's yeast. So all of this to say that we're essentially being purposely inefficient, right? using our fermentation as a source of flavor development as opposed to just pure alcohol production, and then just to have that sit in a barrel for 15 years and taste like wood it just seems like when you phrase it that way, everyone's gonna be like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense. So, but I think you touched on it, seeing how extended maturation in new oak then has how that plays with the brewer's yeast and the yeast derived esters, how that plays with extended oxidation, how those barrel flavors, when kept in check, play with the specialty malt and other sources of flavor for us. Then I think that's a really cool thing. So it's definitely worth pushing it. Like I said, I mean, I think we have a handful of barrels from 2009, and those are the oldest ones I'm kind of monitoring. And I wouldn't say that any of those just taste purely like oak. They might be a little more oak forward than I'm looking for, but like I said, I'm learning something new every time I taste them.
Yeah. So I don't know if you've seen it or not, but Johnny Walker recently came out with a high rye blended Scotch.
Yep.
You seen that?
Yep.
And now it's part of their core range, which so they are committed to this thing.
Yeah, they tried the rye cask too. I don't know if that might have been a one and done type maneuver. But you can definitely see them trying to appeal more to the American drinker, appeal more to the us touching on Scotch being harder to use for cocktails. You're seeing them kind of try to steer Johnny Walker in a way that appeals to both of those, I'd say.
Yeah, it's 60% rye, and then it's the rest is, I think, mostly Cardew, which I bought a bottle of Cardew 12 year, and
it's been a while since I've had that.
That had to be the sweetest Scotch I think I ever drank. It was, when they say sherry bomb, that was more than a sherry bomb. That was a jelly bean. Yeah, to me.
Well, I guess makes sense what they're doing. They're trying to do a sweet and spicy type thing for maybe I don't know what the price point on is, but I could see them trying to push that in a cocktail way.
I think it's around $35, something like that. So it's still it's with the other Johnny Walkers, sure. I think, for the most part.
Yeah.
So do you ever envision playing with another grain to see what will go with your malt for an experiment along the way? Yeah,
we have a handful. I don't think I can reveal a whole lot, but we've done a handful of trials using other malted grains. I will say, it's our equipment is brewing equipment on the front end, so we're not able to push things too crazy far without, kind of making those things hard to work with. I think there was somebody came out with a malted rye Scotch or Irish whiskey and just said that they were never doing it again because it was too awful to work with, and we've seen that to some extent. I wouldn't anticipate anything in the core lineup anyway like that because, again, and I think for people like us that have that knowledge, and your listeners that have that knowledge is great. But you said it earlier when you didn't even put Stranahans in the single malt tasting. Our day to day is mostly about education and trying to educate the consumer on why we're not a bourbon, what American single malt is, what that means, if they care about that, why we're not a Scotch. It's a hard thing to do, and luckily, that's our tour guides are very, very good at that, and they have a really good sort of ease you in educational spiel on that. But for me, then just to release like another type of malted grain, I think kind of muddles the point. So, as a small release for something like Cask Thief or something like that, I could see us doing something like that. But I think we got a ways to go just on general consumer education before I want to start throwing other malted grains at them.
Well, as I understand from people who distill rye whiskey, a lot of them, a good example, George Dickel sources their rye whiskey because it's too hard to make. Yeah, it's
I made it for 2 years in Arkansas too, so I'm acquainted with rye, and I love rye whiskey. I just hate making rye whiskey. I just saw that because Dickel actually used their own rye in that blend they just released with Leopold.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, because they were looking apparently their own rye was different enough from the sourced rye that they didn't really have a means of something to do with it, and that was like the perfect way they found to use it. So I needed to get a hold of the Leopold Bros for some trades because I've heard some cool things.
Well, that's the other thing too, is that you could use rye casks.
Yeah, and we do, and we have. In fact, I don't know if you pointed that out when you were at the distillery, but the rye casks are actually used in this year's 2021 Snowflake release. So, kind of the same. I mean, you just talked about Johnny Walker using rye as part, and I'm sure that was made at their whatever grain distillery that they were using, or probably North British, honestly. But I mean, we have a means of putting flavor into it on the backside, which, as I said earlier, has predominantly been how we've experimented with things before. So a good example of that is we've used some peated casks, and it baffled my mind, like just boggled it, that how quickly the peated flavor sort of infused itself into our whiskey. It was a matter of months or almost weeks. I mean, obviously I'm giving it longer than that, but just to get that initial punch of peat was like almost instantaneous. And so when we've used rye casks, and we have a good handful on site now, that it's kind of interesting in that it doesn't overwhelm the Stranahan's character, but it definitely takes that malt into a spicier territory, which I think is personally really cool. I'm always constantly surprised with just how the many facets of malt and how it can express itself and meld with different flavors. So I plan on continuing to source rye casks for sure.
That's a lot of fun. So we had, when you finished up our tour, we went back and got a chance to, and I know I have a friend of mine who follows Snowflake, and he said, "You got to do what?" I said, "I got to go to the barrels and taste them straight from the barrel."
Right.
As you guided us through the 2020 and the 2021. So let's talk about those two a little bit. And I'm looking forward to getting my bottles so I can do some more tasting on them. The 2020 is called Sunshine Peak. So you name these. Well, let's explain first of all the whole event around Snowflake. So this is a 1 day a year release, and the name Snowflake is because of what? Why did we call it Snowflake?
So that was 2008, I think maybe was the first year they did Snowflake, and they released 3 single cask wine barrels. So it's always been a very wine centric finish, and it actually goes back to us talking way earlier about the use of finishes and local wine barrels. So they named them Snowflake because none of them were the same, right? No 2 releases are the same. So I think, and that they just had those on the shelves that people would come in and buy them, and there wasn't a line or anything, but I think those sold out quicker than expected, and they eventually slightly like two wine barrels. And so I think even 2011 or 2012, it was still like a 2-3 barrel batch size. So slow scale up in volume, still using wine as very much like the the infusion of desserty, sort of rich winter character to something, something you would drink by the fireside again, hence the name Snowflake. And so, yeah, that's one thing I've been playing with, has been continuing to keep that dessert-centric, really decadent character to it while using different sources of barrels to kind of put my own spin on things. So Sunshine specifically was called that. I initially kind of suggested as a joke because 2020 was a kind of dark year for everyone, right? And this was supposed to be the bright, sunny counterpoint to that, released at the end of the year. And then I guess joke's on me, I didn't even release it. So yeah, we had to unfortunately cancel the event for the first time in our history for obvious reasons. But what for me as a blender and producer, it wasn't the end of the world because I just took that blend and put it right back into the casks. And in fact, I'd done that a couple months beforehand because talking about extended maturation or extended marrying, as we did with the 10-year, I've kind of taken that ethos into my Snowflake releases as well. So I'd initially planned on having that marry for 2 months back in the casks it came from. So same idea. I think it was up at high 120s in proof. Took I'd done my little lab blends over and over and over again for weeks on weeks, and in fact months, and finally found the blend I liked. And you can see on the video, I just have graduated cylinders all around behind me, so I'll take my little samples of each of the candidate barrels and kind of narrow those down to the ones I think work well together, and then eventually come up with what my final lab blend I say is, and then I dump the barrels correspondingly, 50 mils to mock up 50 gallons or whatnot. And for those, I dumped it in, I think it was maybe the first week of September or something like that, and cut it back down to around 110 again. And was going to say, hey, just like this will hang out and marry together for 2 months, and then we'll dump them again and bottle it in December. So that would have been December 2020. Turns out didn't happen, so that married all through the next year, all through 2021, and then I finally dumped them in November. So a year and 2 months, and the character had changed, even barrel to barrel, because it was back in the different barrels that had come from, had changed quite a bit. So.
I assume you had kept a sample of where it was at in December of 2020
So
now.
A little bit more richness to it, a little bit. I used some Moscatel barrels. So to go back, Sunshine not only in name alone, but in spirit character as well. Then primary components of the blend were apple brandy casks, both Applejack from New York and then Calvados we got some from France. So not only was apple going to be the main character there, which I think we get a little bit of that in our fermentation esters as well, like apricot, apple, banana, from our yeast fermentations, but to accent that, but then also to have two different types of apple brandy to give it a kind of layered character there as well. So bright, juicy apple from the Applejack, and then more of that French oak kind of spiced apple character from the Calvados. So that I think was about 60% of the blend between the two of those. And when I say blend and those, it's our single malt finished in those casks. So I think we finished 6 and 7 year old in those, and like I said, gave it over a year in that cask again. So then I didn't want to get fully away from the Snowflake, wine character, but I wanted to move those wine flavors kind of into the background as a backing note. And so Moscatel 2 casks were used. So again, not quite as nutty as a sherry, but more of that port, bold fruit character in the background. Again, still got that bright fruit on the front end, but then sort of backed by that. And then a little bit of French oak. We were able to get a new French oak barrel, and I used that in both of the releases as kind of the central, give it a little bit of continuity between batches, and that French oak was there to kind of tie the whole thing together for Sunshine. Yeah.
And there was a pepperiness to it, I remember, on the finish as well, which was interesting. It's not a high proof. It's what we were tasting was out of the barrel, of course. So it was a bit higher than. This is why I'm really interested in seeing what it's going to taste like now that I have it, from the bottle.
And so that barrel we pulled out of for you had not been touched. So I think that was one of the Applejack barrels I'd filled, not quite a year and a half before then. So what you tasted there is going to be more Applejack character and less of the entire blend, right? But I think they're definitely going to be cool in their own ways. Yeah, so 94 has pretty much been it's what our yellow label, our originals bottled at, and it's traditionally what we bottled nearly everything at, and so Snowflake kind of sits there. Not, the highest proof, but again, for people that maybe are used to drinking Johnny Walker or something that's 40% or 43%, 47 definitely packs a little bit more of a punch.
So the other one is the 2021 release, which is the Mount Eolus. Is that correct?
Yeah, I had to watch some YouTube videos. So Eolus.
Eolus, okay.
So yeah, it was going to be, for a minute there I was pushing to do Grays and Tories, which is a pretty famous double peak that you can hit in 1 year, but I guess there's a Gray's Peak vodka out there, so that was not gonna fly, unfortunately. So sticking with Sunshine from the year before, I just found another 14er, which is what we always name these after, 14,000 foot peaks in Colorado, and I found another one in that same range, which was Aeolus, and that just means the Greek god of the wind. And I thought that was kind of neat because I wanted this one to be a little dark and stormier compared to the bright fruit character of 2020, to do one that was more, I guess, moody, for lack of a better word. So we used some tequila barrels for this one. And again, same idea as apple brandy with 2020. We used both Reposado and Extra Añejo tequila barrels to give it kind of a multi-layered thing to it. And both those came from Reserva de la Familia barrels, so incredibly high quality tequila, $200 a bottle or something. And not just punchy with tequila flavor, but more of that high end, like herbal, peppery, agave sort of flavor to it. And so that again made up the bulk of the blend. I think 50 to 60, something like that. And then used rye whiskey casks to again kind of double down on that spice character, and those actually were hugely vanilla bombs, which I was a big fan of, because again I needed to have that dessert character, but from a different source than just using a fresh red wine barrel every year. But we did use some tawny port again, because I wasn't trying to make this one a fruit forward one, and tawny port leans more into the caramel aspect of a port, right? And so it does have fruit to it, but it's very more like stewed fruit, caramelized fruit in the background, and a little bit more of that French oak cask I was telling you about. And then lastly, I siphoned out 15 gallons just straight out of one of the peated casks, just to put a wisp of smoke in there. And my process to blending a lot of the time is sort of that layered approach. Find what your base is, then keep stacking on that with smaller amounts, and really you just need to find that last puzzle piece, that last like key to lock it all together. And for me, for 2021, the peated cask was that. And again, talking about 15 gallons, not a whole lot. But again, blending with peat, it's a powerful force there. And I know it's a lot of people. It's not necessarily what a lot of Americans are looking for. So one of my goals as a big peat head was to get some peat into one of our special releases, and maybe people wouldn't even know it. So I think when you go looking for it, you can find it on the finish. But I think a lot of people would maybe be surprised to know that it's in there. It's there for that herbal background quality, almost little. Turn that tequila a tiny bit into the mezcal territory, but not overwhelmingly.
I loved what the rye did to it, and then you mentioned the peat, and you asked me if I was tasting it, because I love peated whiskey, and I was like, no, I don't, but the herbaliness of this is so nice that it doesn't. And I tell people, I think of an American whiskey, rye whiskey, and peated whiskey are like cousins to me. They are personalities. That people either really like or they're maybe not so into, and they're also personalities that can easily take over, but they're personalities that can also be killed off with age.
Yes.
And so it's really interesting to see them paired together.
Yeah, you hear about some of those like legendary old ryes where the spice character is kind of faded out, or old peated whiskey for that matter, where the peat's almost fully faded out. But yeah, you just have that incredible complexity. So I definitely agree with you there.
I had a 12-year-old when I had COVID. I lost my sense of smell. And I decided that I wasn't going to stop drinking whiskey. I was going to just find a whiskey that maybe worked with my COVID. So
Sure.
I had a bottle of 12-year-old rye that to me tasted like a mix of leather and gasoline.
Oh boy.
And it just was not that interesting to me at all. But I would pour it, and for some reason, I had just enough sense that when I tasted it, I could taste a little bit of a fruity character coming out of it, but I couldn't taste the leather or the gasoline. So that became my drinking bottle while I was having my loss of sense of smell.
You
So
didn't want to
if you
just
don't-
hit yourself with Octomore every day?
Well, that's what's funny is that I got myself a Lefroy cask strength,
Yeah.
and I sipped it, and I went, "There's no earthiness to it. It just tastes like smoke."
Mm-hmm.
There was no character to it beyond just tasting like I was drinking a bottle of liquid smoke. And for me, Lefroy is one of those things that if you give it to somebody who hasn't really drank a peated whiskey before, they're like, "Oh, that's just too aggressive on the smoke." For me, it's like it's all the underlying character to it, that kind of seaweediness and the little iodine quality that it has, and in the cask strength having it tastes like you're eating dirt in
Yeah, I was drinking some
Scotland.
10-year-old, right? 10-year-old cask strength. I was drinking some of that on Saturday. It is fantastic.
Yeah.
I was happy to see they released that sherry cask one, because that's what I would always get people to get, that PX one that you can only get in duty free when they were flying. Yeah, I thought I saw that back there.
Yeah.
I haven't had that one, but I imagine it's stellar. I see the Glendronach 15 behind you too, so that's
Yeah. Yep.
that's a hell of a
Yeah, I figured I'd put up a representation of many of my favorites
yeah.
there. So
Glendronach, that was one of the only one I've stocked up on bottles before I flew back to the U.S. when I moved back, and Glendronach took up a good chunk of that. When they were that like perfect time where I think they're saying they're giving you an extra couple years of age in the 15.
Yep.
Yeah, so
I actually just talked to the brand ambassador, and we went into that because they had mothballed the place.
Sure,
So they were kicking out some older whiskey, and in fact he sent me a sample, and this is an older bottle that still had Billy Walker's name on it. So I thought, let me compare the two, but they were exactly the same. I couldn't really tell a difference between them.
Yeah, those folks know what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. So I was going to ask you a question about, because one of the things about the Snowflake Festival is that usually it is at the distillery. This particular year it was at Red Rocks, but people stand outside, they camp outside for days on end to be able to have a chance to get these bottles.
Yes.
What whiskey would you wait outside the distillery for, non-Stranahan's whiskey, that you would just be like, you know what, I would stand outside the distillery for a day or two to get that?
If they were going to give me a free bottle, I would stand outside Brook Laddie to try to get some dark arts or something. I don't know that I'd stand outside then to pay whatever those go for nowadays, but
Yeah.
some of those legendary Bowmores, I would consider setting up camp on Isla, I guess. But
Yeah.
I try not to actually spend a whole lot of money on whiskey these days. I promised my wife that was. If anything, I just trade Stranny samples when I'm jonesing for something. But yeah, no, I mean, go figure that I'd go hang out on Isla to wait out for some stuff.
Is that a dream vacation?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I wish I had a bunch of friends that went up to Skye when we were in school there, and I was busy writing my thesis, so I didn't go with them. But yeah, Talisker was one of kind of like my formative drams. You know, I wasn't too big a peat head for just about 6 months of living there, and then I think I remember the light bulb moment was a Talisker 10, and so that one always is near and dear to my heart. And you know, when you hear about Skye and see pictures of the Isle of Skye. Ideally on a non-foggy day, I guess, that mind-blowing stuff.
I got so lucky when I went because it was sunny the whole time I was in Scotland. It was in April. It was just before all the festivals were going to get started, and so I got to drive all over Skye without the without a cloud anywhere.
Yep.
And it's gorgeous. But it's have you seen the movie Highlander?
No, I haven't actually. I probably need. That might be a good revisit into things.
Yeah, I just actually bought an updated version of it where they've re-enhanced it and everything. That was all filmed on Skye, and so if you want to see what Skye looks like, it's absolutely incredible scenery throughout that entire film. So you have to suspend your understanding of what accents are, because all the time that you're hearing the guy who's supposed to be an Egyptian Spaniard, Sean Connery, speaking in a Scottish accent, and the Scottish guy speaking in a French accent, it's a little bizarre, but it works.
Well, maybe I'll just keep my eyes on the scenery when I'm watching it then.
Yeah. It's a fun movie, but it's a little campy. It's a B movie. It's definitely a B movie from the late 80s.
Yep.
So, well, cool. So anything special we can expect? I was going to say when I was there, you guys got me a little experimental bottle of a Portuguese fortified wine cask, which was delicious.
Yep.
And I couldn't take the rest of it back on the plane with me, unfortunately, but I drank as much of it as I could before I left.
Those were super high quality casks. It was kind of just on a lark that our barrel broker had a couple of these wine barrels that no one had heard of or knew what they were, and they weren't selling them for too much. So I was like, yeah, I'll take a couple. Why not? And, you always run the risk with those imported wine barrels that you might get a sulfur bomb of a cask, when they treat it. And those didn't have a hair of sulfur on them. So I almost thought about putting those into some snowflakes, but then I thought they stood up on their own, and they were a weird enough type of wine that people hadn't heard of that it could fit into our experimental series, which we release in our store. So we have a distillery exclusive, so that's like the Bushmills cask I was talking about, and we do those at 94 proof or 90 proof. They're kind of more in the vein of our standard expressions, but then that little experimental series we do in the 375 half pint bottles, and they're gonna usually be not necessarily at cask strength. What's kind of fun about those is it's whatever strength I want them to be. So sometimes more like some of those Ardbeg releases, they'll be in the low 50s or mid 50s because I want to make them a bit punchier. But we won't have any. We kind of got through our big release season, so really those are the only avenues we'll be doing anything new in the next few months. So we try to do a couple of those exclusives a year, and so I'm still kind of playing around with what I want the first one of next year to be. And then, we'll probably release a handful more of those single cask experimental ones. So I know we just bottled a gin cask one, which is kind of out there. I think that'll
interesting.
I think it'll be cool to use in our cocktail program a bit as well. It's actually a Highland Park barrel that was then refilled with gin, and I was like, damn it, I wish I could have just got the Highland Park barrel straight up.
Yeah.
But it was cool enough that it's definitely. It's been in that gin cask for over 2 years now. So initially it was just big juniper, but then that's kind of faded a little bit to more of like a botanical, herbal, and citrus character. So it's that's a fun avenue for us just to release things like that, where we're like, this is a really weird one, and I think a lot of nerdy people like me want to try really weird ones. So they can be fun, and I think that wine one's just a grand slam. Like, whether you love every little production detail or whether you just like a good whiskey, that's going to satisfy both. Gin one maybe not quite as much for your average consumer, but
right.
That's the deal with that one, is I can just we'll put out things as we see it. So those are the only other things going on anytime too soon. And then we do our annual Cask Thief Festival. Traditionally, we did it in June. The last couple of years, because of COVID, we moved to September, and we're still playing around with which one of those we might target for this year. But yeah, basically, I think I've mentioned it a couple times during this without explaining it. But basically, it's the kind of counterpoint to Snowflake, where Snowflake's about the blend, right? The whole is more than the parts, and then Cask Thief is just 6 individual single barrels that we think are amazing and fun on their own. It's kind of like the experimental series that has popped up with the wine barrel year somehow has sort of came out of that to have something on the shelf all the time. But yeah, same idea as Snowflake. Cask Thief's just one day, but rather than people having to wait out by the distillery and really like earn their bottle, it's just a big block party almost. So we've done like a pig roast over barrel staves, whiskey ice cream collaborations, and then we just thief straight out of these barrels at the distillery and into people's glasses. And we always try to have a few off the wall experimental ones, a few crazy cast finishes, and it's just been a really fun, really successful thing for us.
Well, it's been absolute pleasure talking to you here, and also I really enjoyed getting to tour around, pick your brain a little bit on the tour. You're like, ask questions, and that just opened the door for me. I'll ask all the questions you ever want to hear.
I mean, well, like we said, that's my preferred way to do any sort of media thing. Just kind of hang out and chat with fellow whiskey nerds, and getting on a stage and talking to a few thousand people is not my wheelhouse, even though it may have to become my wheelhouse. But no, like you just said, I'll take that any day. I had a great time as well.
Yeah, well, fantastic. Well, I wish you much luck in the new year, and can't wait till I get back out to Stranahans again.
Yep, hopefully we'll catch you here soon.